During the early stages of film production, audiences demonstrated a fascination with moving pictures, now referred to as the cinema of attractions. This period emphasized visual spectacle and unique imagery over narrative structure. The first filmmakers were more aware of their audience and were creating images of fantasy and exoticism specifically for them to see. After 1910, however, film theorists observed a decisive shift towards theatrical storytelling. Filmmakers began to emulate the more established narrative modes of theatre and literature. Tom Gunning expressed frustration over this transition, viewing it as a retreat towards safe, conventional forms of entertainment, and away from cinema's unique artistic potential. The primary difference between the cinema of attractions and narrative cinema is their relationship to the audience. Contemporary filmmakers work towards the creation of a story with a realistic setting, even in the context of fantasy and science fiction. The screen is a window through which we can experience this world, but the characters in it are unaware of us, and our gaze is voyeuristic and unrequited. Early filmmakers, however, directly interact with the audience, and their images are meant to stimulate us on a purely exhibitionist level. In the cinema of attraction, the visuals are the subject of curiosity, and even if there is a story, its importance is ancillary and serves only to generate further aesthetic stimuli for the audience. For narrative films, the opposite is true. Certainly, a contemporary film can produce spectacular images, but the immediate reality of the script must always take precedence. A character in a narrative film, with the possible exception of satire, will never address the audience or break the realistic illusion that the movie screen provides. Conversely, characters in the cinema of attraction often acknowledge the audience, thereby breaking the fourth wall. This instills in us the notion that what we are watching is also watching us, that these moving images are in an active dialogue with us, and that we are not passive but active observers. Gunning described this kind of cinema as a fictional world willing to rupture itself in the solicitation of attention. The spectacle of these films is shared by the characters and the audience. The screen is not a window, but a doorway. As Strauven argues, films during this period had the ability to produce exhibitionist confrontation rather than diegetic absorption. To Gunning's annoyance, however, filmmakers after 1910 began to move away from this style of cinema, instead working on narrative-driven features which he regarded as mere imitations of theatre. The cinema of attraction presented several types of spectacle to elicit audience attention. Perhaps the most prevalent images were of the fantastical, the exotic, and the erotic. The latter two are fairly self-explanatory and continue to exist in the form of documentary and pornography. Exotic films allowed people to view foreign animals and cultures, and experience worlds that they would otherwise never be aware of. They were able to transport the poor and working class into a state of wonder and excitement. Erotic films were slightly less ambitious, and sought to elicit arousal and possibly laughter from their audience members. Nevertheless, it was a popular attraction for people in the early 20th century, and as stated, continues to exist today, especially online. Contemporary documentaries and pornography are pure exhibitionism, and labour under the aesthetic power of their subjects rather than any pre-constructed narrative. Fantasy spectacle faded quickly after the 1910s. Filmmakers like Georges Méliès and Edwin Porter have been studied primarily for their contribution to cinema as a storytelling medium. However, they were far more fascinated with the visual power of film. Méliès's 1902 feature, A Trip to the Moon, depicts the first imagery of man's flight into outer space. Yet, there is no scientific process to this film, rather, it is pure mysticism. The rocket is built by men dressed as wizards, and the moon is depicted as a living human face. While Méliès's brilliant set design might have been achieved on a theatre stage, his use of editing is something uniquely cinematic, and would have left audience members in a state of delight and awe. With the proliferation and dissection of the movie industry in the preceding century, one wonders whether movies could ever again inspire such amazement. Gunning explains that the cinema of attraction has not so much been extinguished by narrative, but has instead gone underground. It occasionally presents itself as a component of narrative film. For example, in musical films such as The Wizard of Oz or The Sound of Music, the narrative reality will suddenly halt, and characters will burst into sporadic song and dance for the direct involvement and enjoyment of the audience. Furthermore, avant-garde filmmakers like David Lynch have continued to utilize imagery over plot. YouTube has been described as the new cinema of attractions. Like early cinema, online videos are created to elicit a reaction from the viewer, whether it be shock, surprise, laughter, or excitement. As online videos are so short, usually 5 to 10 minutes, they are rarely narrative driven and instead focus on provocative imagery designed to engage the viewer. People are expected to comment on YouTube videos and engage with the poster or other viewers. Another connection to the cinema of attractions is the way people deliver popular videos through links, emails, and friend recommendations. It is a sort of communal process that compares with the advertising technique of vaudeville and sideshows and contrasts the rigidly corporate advertising of narrative cinema. YouTube and other online media networks may represent a return to the style and atmosphere of spectacle over narrative. Finally, video games might also be described as a medium that emphasizes spectacle over narrative. Like the cinema of attractions, it engages directly with its audience and focuses on imagery designed to excite, threaten, and bamboozle them. The dialogue between game and player may be even more intense than film, since the player's virtual self resides within the screen and is therefore experiencing the joys and dangers of the imaginary world in real time. The player is able to change and interact with the fantasy world, but is in turn altered by them. Ironically, video games are undergoing their own crisis of identity, which echoes early cinema. Game designers are increasingly emulating the narrative style of Hollywood films, employing cinematic cutscenes and using celebrity voice actors to appeal to a wider demographic. Little by little, control is being taken away from the player and reconstituted into a more linear narrative trajectory. Perhaps each new medium faces a period where it has to choose between emulating the conventions of older art forms or developing its own unique style.